My lords, today I bring disturbing news. I have been contemplating several theories for some time that may indicate that we may have been wrong about key elements of the history of our galaxy. Namely, these points are: the divine Zroni did not die. They actually ascended beyond physical form and manifest as the Shroud Gods we know to occupy the Shroud. Furthermore, the Toxic God is also a Zroni, or even the sole survivor of the Saviors. And finally, the Zroni built the Contingency. I shall explore each of these 3 points in the best detail I can. A lot of this, of course, is speculation, and I welcome your feedback on it. If it is true, I wonder what this could mean for the fate of our galaxy. A brief recap of Zroni history. The Zroni were, in brief, the first and most powerful psionics to have existed in our galaxy. They discovered the dimension which we came to know of as the Shroud, and at some point the Zroni population reached a critical mass. It appears that their collective unconscious mind began to make contact with the Proto-Shroud. This led to mass lucid dreaming across their entire population. The Zroni studied this phenomenon, and they discovered how to psionically project themselves into the Shroud, at which point they also found out that they could manipulate the very fabric of reality using their newfound psionic powers. It wasn't long before the Zroni discovered that they could physically enter the Shroud and live like gods, transforming the dimension to suit their whims. These changes were having an effect on the physical realm, and this led to a serious discourse. 2 sides were formed, the Divine and the Saviors, and eventually it resulted in a fully fledged civil war that threatened to annihilate the entire galaxy. A key point to highlight here from the Zroni records is that the Saviors argued the Divine were like parasitic gods. At the end of the war, according to the data crystals and the information that we've gathered from dig sites, every Savior came together, sacrificing themselves and channeling their power into a sole Zroni Savior. This single being used the power of the Zroni to defeat the Divine, or at least this is what the data crystals would like us to believe. So I've just covered a brief recap of the Zroni and their civil war. The devil, of course, is in the detail, so let's get into it. Firstly, it is important to clarify that the Zroni wanted their records to be found. The crystals that they left behind called out to us with some sort of latent psionic capability. Now, it's not unusual for a people to wish to be remembered, but given that they were fighting and losing a war that would result in the annihilation of the galaxy, I think it's noteworthy. Furthermore, for reasons that will become clear later, I think each of these crystals is actually a long past dead Zroni. Either they somehow uploaded their memories of events into the crystals, or at least part of their psyche. We discovered a sentient one, but I'll get to that later. One of the crystals we discovered, located in some sort of laboratory at the 3rd dig site we found, had the following to show us. The Zroni researchers experimenting with the Shroud recorded their experiments here, and if we are interpreting these crystals correctly, these researchers were extremely frustrated. According to the records, this research had been ridiculed by their peers and was largely discredited. However, these Zroni researchers believed that they were not the only entities in the Shroud, and to quote them, that their collective fear and desire of their entire race was coalescing into distinct sapient entities. The researchers put forward that desiring to grow stronger, these entities had begun to subtly influence the emotions and thought of suitable Zroni, slowly causing their behaviour to become more extreme, and that this may have directly caused the Zroni Civil War. The records continue, but will jump forward to near the end of the war. Using this Zro dust required a great sacrifice from the Saviors, but with it, they were able to turn the tide of the war against the Divine. As the Divine faced defeat, their ever-increasing rage and fear spawned new and terrible entities within the Shroud. This feedback loop grew, pushing the Divine further into the depths of madness. They were driven to ever-worsening atrocities, which urged the Saviors to end the war at any cost. On the brink of defeat, the Divine decided upon their ultimate plan, the end of the cycle. the growth of the galactic core would be accelerated to consume the galaxy as soon as possible. At worst, the Saviors and every other species in the galaxy would be destroyed, leaving the Divine to rule the Shroud for a vast but finite time. It was, however, possible that the expansion would become self-sustaining, consuming not just our galaxy, but the universe itself, providing a source of energy which may not be finite, but would at least come close enough to it, an amount that would make no practical difference. Of course, faced with annihilation, the Saviors chose to sacrifice their entire population, save for one Zroni. The last remaining survivor used the psionic residue of the entire species to destroy every Zroni, and thus every Divine in existence, ending the threat for all time. The Zroni were wiped out without a trace, save for a small amount of Zro that was left over. That ends the Zroni records that we found in crystals. However, as our expedition made ready to leave, one of the Zroni crystals suddenly re-established contact with us. It indicated that it could prove useful to us should we decide to bring it along with us. Even if the claim was untrue, none of the other crystals we encountered showed signs of sapience, so we chose to bring it with us, and it would turn out to be occupied by an entity. The creature called itself Jarbaxti, and could from time to time be consulted with for guidance. Sadly, we were unable to commune in the conventional sense, and thus could not ask the questions we truly sought the answers for. But we just covered a lot, so let's break it down. The Zroni researchers believed that there were other entities in the Shroud, and that the collective fear and desire of the Zroni people was coalescing into distinct sapient entities. I wonder if this record is to be read literally, or if the interpretation of how it's communicated to us is mixed with emotion. The fear and desire of the Zroni people were coalescing into distinct sapient entities. What if this means the Divine were becoming the entities mentioned, forming them, shaping them into the weapons that they themselves were becoming? A feedback loop was created between the beings, their acts driving the specific sex that they coveted, in turn making them ever stronger. I suggest that these individuals or groups of Zroni Divine became the Shroud entities that we know of today, i.e. the Whispers in the Void, the Eater of Worlds, the Composer of Strands, and the Instrument of Desire. These four pantheons of the Shroud each represent quite specific traits that appear to be present in life. The Composer represents mutation and change, the Eater is rage and violence, the Instrument covers desire and greed, and the Whispers desires knowledge, unbidden or not. Further to the Zroni becoming these entities, I think that they fed off any organic in the galaxy who worship the Divine directly, through prayer and the like, or even enacts the will of said entity, i.e. the Eater grows stronger when violence and rage is abundant, whether the violence and rage is in its name or not. And furthermore, to support the theory that the Zroni became the Shroud Gods, the Zroni crystal references the end of the cycle, but not as a separate entity. This is referenced as a plan enacted by the Zroni Divine. Now one could ask, is this a misdirection by the end of the cycle? I don't think it is. I think that the end of the cycle appears happy on rare occasions to communicate with other psionics. So if it existed at the time, then why not communicate with a Zroni? I think this is a key element, and it was either a single Zroni or a small group of the Divine that became the entity that we know as the end of the cycle. I am confident that the end of the cycle did not exist as an entity prior to the Zroni reaching the Shroud. And I think this becomes more apparent when we discuss the Toxic God, which I'll come on to shortly. But first, the Animator of Clay. Now this feels like a lesser entity, or simply one that is aloof to organic affairs. It does not create covenants like the other 5 entities I just discussed. The Animator instead has an odd relationship with machines, which I won't go into detail here, but importantly, it has a relationship with both Zarqualan, a long-dead alien, and Satana, the synthetic queen. We have records of a psionic empire bargaining with the Animator to help them fight Satana, and it has within it some key information. I shall detail the recording and then explore it further. The Shroud descended. In the depths of our trance, we allowed ourselves to drift, caught in the current of our visions, not our own. A great expanse stretched out in every direction, featureless and uniform. For a lifetime, the expanse was untroubled. A tremor passed through it. When once there was emptiness, now there was a form. A body moulded from base material life, fashioned in the shape of a doll, slim and graceful. Its 4 long arms folded serenely into its lap. A terrible purpose was written on its features, and around its head glowed a golden halo. We sent out a thought. Zatanna has escaped. The shroud churned. Still caught in our transfer, we were plunged into a swelling abyss. We hear a command from the depths of our mind. Indicate desired output. We stated that we wished to stop Zatanna. As if pulled by unseen strings, the doll jerked to its feet. It began to move slowly at first, and then, with an increasing vigor, its 4 arms swinging in wild arcs, its feet tapping. A queen reduced to a puppet. As her dance continued, several new figures emerged from the primordial expanse. 4 dolls of exquisite craftsmanship and unnerving detail. There is no doubt what these are. No question of their meaning. Once more, the voice reached out to us. Initiate selection protocol. Only one option was available to us. At an almost immeasurably immense cost, we would pay for a doll of the Zroni priest. The shroud coursed within us, coalescing into a new pattern and a new vision. Surrounded by the others, the queen's movements were no longer those of a puppet. Her strings were cut. The golden halo that encircled her head began to fade. She regarded us with an expression of artless joy. She embraced us, and, in a single fleeting instant, we knew the fullness of her compassion. Shuddering, we awoke from our shared vision. So to explore some of the key points from this vision, the first doll with 4 arms and a golden halo is Zatanna, the queen reduced to a puppet. But the 4 dolls of exquisite craftsmanship and unnerving detail, the vision tells us there is no doubt what they are. Are these the 4 Shroud Gods, minus the end of the cycle? Maybe. But why does the animator request such a large amount of Zro as a payment for this binding? And why is it represented in the exchange for a Zroni doll? What relevance do the Zroni have here? Either the Zroni aspect relates to Zatanna, which it may, but is unlikely. It could be suggesting that Zatanna was once a Zroni priest. This is entirely plausible, other than the fact that all the Zroni appeared to have been interested in was psionic ascension, which tends to be the anathema to synthetic ascension, but we'll touch on that later with the contingency. More likely, in my opinion, is that the Zroni doll relates to the animator and the other Shroud Gods. For what other possible reason could there be for its representation here? The toxic god is the savior. To build on this further, we are aware that the toxic god is a real living entity. This reading is an outtake from a record regarding an empire who went down the route of cosmogenesis and was said to have met the god himself. And it reads, "After the violence of the crossing, the other side was quiet. An unnatural stillness surrounded us. The needle is undamaged, but no critical components were lost. Between one moment and the next, telemetry reports began to flood in. It is here, the object of our quest. Our nights stand petrified and uncertain, while all around us is draped in the familiar decor of the shroud. Hark, it speaks. Mine champions, thy coming here was foretold, and thou hast proved their worth." A million questions flooded into our mind, and a single answer came in reply. We were to craft its weapon, the Horizon Needle, and now we are to fight alongside it. We're to embark on a journey across dimensions, a crusade against the horrors of the multiverse. The Shroud is not its home, but harbours the legacy of those that were divine. Something that could bring about the end of our home galaxy. Something that needs slaying. It seizes our systems, its power immense, the needle is turned into a horizon lance, a weapon sharp enough to pierce the heart of any foe. Our quest has only just begun. I think there is more key information hidden in these records. The Toxic God has a mortal enemy, the end of the cycle, and it specifically says that the Shroud is not its home, but harbours the legacy of those who were divine. The use of it here likely means the Toxic God, but it could be referencing the end of the cycle, and those who were divine is in my eyes a clear reference to the divine Zroni, the legacy of the Zroni. The legacy of the Zroni is the Shroud Gods. I think that this further supports the theory that the Zroni divine became the Shroud Gods, and to add a touch of drama, could the Toxic God be the lone saviour, the survivor, whose final act may have destroyed the Zroni people physically, but perhaps ascended them into another plane of existence, where they still fight to this day on a level far beyond us? The Toxic God, the saviour, built his forces after all this time, cultivating an army of devotees, of knights who do not worship other Shroud-based entities, but instead search for the truth that the Toxic God offers. The final point I'll discuss here today is that I believe that the Zroni could easily be the Ren Maru, the beings that created the contingency, and thus this would solidify what a Class 30 singularity is after all. One of the most likely possibilities we have for what a Class 30 singularity represents, which is why the contingency exists, pertains to empires becoming as powerful as the Zroni divine, and through psionic means, growing the supermassive black hole at the centre of the galaxy. If this were true, it would answer several questions, such as why the contingency did not fire during the Zroni Civil War. Well, they couldn't because they didn't exist. Why the contingency creators self-terminated. Well, we know why the Zroni self-terminated. And perhaps they left the seeds of the contingency behind to prevent what happened to them from ever happening again. I've covered a lot here, my lords, and this brings my thoughts to a close, but I'm very interested in what you think. Am I on the right path here? Do you think the Zroni could be the Shroud Gods? Could they have been the ones that created the contingency? Please let me know your thoughts. And if you want to learn about the crisis level events, then I suggest clicking the video on screen now.